Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's time for the first deck video of the new mini expansion. So we've had United Front, and I'm coming to you with my first kind of deck video. As ever, I'm a Kards Content Creator. You can find all the stuff down below. You know the deal by now, be at the end as well. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Support if you can afford to do so. It's hugely appreciated. So, United Front landed, and we've had lots of different things that are there, and I could go into lots and lots of top meta decks, and hey, at some point I might do. If you're interested, go for it, but there are other people who cover those. What I wanted to do was cover something that I think is a really good, solid deck to play if you want to, A, get decent results. This isn't going to get you... I don't think this is not going to qualify you for tournaments. It's not quite tier 1 right now, in my opinion. I think it might have it in it, but I don't know. And I haven't had the time to go and actually prove the point. But I've comfortably landed in top 1,000 with it, and I don't climb. So make of that what you will. But this is the deck that I have been most interested to build for quite a while, ever since we started seeing some of the new France stuff. So this is a US-France mid-range deck. And the first thing I want to do is kind of talk a little bit about defining mid-range, because there are lots of different ways that people look at mid-range, and I kind of want to make sure people understand what I mean by mid-range as a gigantic CCG dinosaur. So, back in the day, we would have considered mid-range to be anything which relies on value on board and trading. So you're looking at units being able to 2-for or 2-for-1 at minimum. So what you want is to make sure that it is not easy for your opponent to remove one of your units for the cost of a single card, whether that be a unit on board or removal. Now obviously in cards there's removal out there that can be quite efficient, so it's never going to be perfect, but it gives you the idea that it gives you the advantage in one of the most limited resources in the game, which is cards. I'm not going to go into the multiple resources of the game, that's a whole different video. But by doing so, you gain a steady tempo advantage, because you are able to keep pushing tempo on your opponent because they are losing in the trades. And that's where mid-range wants to sit. Now, in cards, because we have the front line, mid-range needs to, oddly enough, be able to get off to a relatively quick start to establish itself. Otherwise, it tends to fall foul of just getting out-positioned. And this is where one classic deck that could in theory be considered quite a good kind of spiraling mid-range deck is Alpine, but it never quite gets there because it can't establish itself well enough early. What we got from the new France tools is cards that allow us, when combined with the US, to establish early board position and then build. And then we start to take advantage of the middle game and look to end the game before our opponent can get to the heavy end of their deck. So that's the general strategy. The strategy is to get good early position. You're not, however, running hard on high roll. So there is a tendency to focus too much on the potential high roll with this deck. And I'll talk about that when we get into the cards in a minute. But we don't actually want to do that when we're mulliganing. What we want to look for is good establishment and the ability to play on curve so that we can do this. As I say, this deck is probably not going to be hyper-competitive. It's not intended to be, but what it's intended to be is a good fun deck to play that goes to the fundamental values of the game and allows you to practice those fundamental values in a functional way, and I think is just a useful deck to play to keep your eye in. And especially if you are kind of newer to the game and you can get access to the cards, we will talk about whether you can budget down some of this, and you probably can, and you can always ask on Discord and stuff anyway. Right, let's hop across into my game client, and I'll at least talk you through the deck and kind of give you an idea where it is, and then at the end we'll have some gameplay examples. Right, so this is the deck. This is my version of it. There are others, but I believe this version to be pretty good. And I will talk you through, as I traditionally do in this, card by card. So at the top we have the card, which is also the spawner of the great high roll debate. This is the 13E Dragons from France. It's a 0 cost, 0 op cost unit, which means that you can put it down for free on the first turn as long as you haven't deployed another unit. Now, lots of people get obsessed with the high roll potential of this, and we'll talk about that when we get to buffs in a minute. But this is a unit we want to see, but it is not a unit we need to hard mulligan for. It's good value, but you can play out this deck without getting the turn 1 high roll and still win. The turn 1 high roll, I will talk about fully, but it is 13 E-Dragons into either For Freedom or Bocage Warfare, and then push it forward to have a high value unit. But even at 1-2, this is good enough to give you position, and you can still deploy something else 1/64th if you don't have a buff. Or the M20 Scout Car. So people go backwards and forwards on this because and if you are uncomfortable with the potential for the Scout Car to be worked against you, as in you have to target an opponent and then they get the bonus for the destruction for some reason, you're finding that happens to you regularly. Probably won't, but if it does, you can easily turn this into a Greyhound, but I just think this is worth it for the advantage that you can get. In particular, this is really good if you can play it down and use it to buff one of your slower cards in the back line or your artillery. We'll get to that in a bit, and where we target this buff is actually quite useful, because it can make trading this card even worse for your opponent. As it is, trading a 1-3 is annoying and difficult for a lot of decks, particularly aggro decks. If this buff is targeted on an aircraft or an artillery that is sitting in the support line while you're still holding frontline presence, this becomes an even worse trade. And that is something we want. Now, we only run a couple of these because we just don't have room to run a third. I know you could, but I don't think it's necessary. And we'll look at curve at the end. But targeting this buff is useful. 164, this is just value. This card is just value. Learning to play it is important. If you haven't got a target for it, it's generally not worth blitzing it unless you're using it to remove a threat. But when you're establishing an early board, this can be a great way of strengthening a unit that's hard for your opponent to trade. Later on in the game, this is just a great free 1-cost point of damage that then buffs a unit. Doesn't, a lot of the time, because all of our units are about value, we don't really mind where this is landing so long as it does land. Obviously, we run a full set of 4. You can see that on the screen. Bocage Warfare. So this is a very important card in this deck, but the first importance of this is realising not to obsess over this card. We only have 2 copies. We are not always going to see it on turn 1. When we do see it on turn 1 and we have dragons in hand, this is incredible because it gives us a 3-4 in the front line for 1 credit, which is huge. But don't obsess over getting the high roll on this, because Bocage Warfare is strong all the way through the game on this. 1 point for Blitz unit to get +2/+2 when you run a lot of Blitz units is just good value. There isn't really a bad time to play this. Early on, it's great for establishing position and will certainly give you a strong win advantage, but is not the only way to play this card. For Freedom, this is yet another card that's just value. It's a 1-cost buff that also draws a card. Again, there is rarely a bad time to play this, just picking the right target. A lot of the time, if you're trading heavy, that is, your opponent is trading hard into you in the front line, that's where you want to put this. However, if you've already established the front line and you have a backline threat, a support line threat, whether that be a Cali or an aircraft, some form of positional threat, often this is much better put on that, because then you get a draw and you might get something more useful. 5th Cuirassier. Now, I want to talk about this card in a very specific way. So 5th Cuirassier, I'll pull up the 18E so we can see it, the 18th. So 5E Cuirassier is just a good body. 2 cost, 2/3 with Blitz. So turn 3 play, this is a good body on turn 3. And if it's the first thing you drop, you get a really good body to drop next turn and still have a spare credit. Like, if you're dropping this on turn 2 because you're slightly behind on curve, you're still not complaining. Yes, you've lost Blitz, but you get a perfect turn 3 play, which will then have 0 op cost. Genuinely, I think that is the key with this, is learning not to obsess over whether the 18 gets the op cost reduction. There are plenty of times when just having a 4/4 guard that sits in the back line at 3 op cost and you don't make use of it to do anything else is good. It just gives you cover and a body that you can trade later if you come under pressure. Yes, of course it's fantastic if you can get it out and play an order on the same turn and it's 0 op cost, because then you can push it up and use it to trade. But it's not a terrible card in and of itself, it's just a good body, and we like good bodies. Also, kind of edge cases to be aware of. If you do manage, if you are in a position where you kind of putting the cuirassiers down on turn 2 and you're dropping the 18 on turn 3, and you can Bocage Warfare as 0 op cost 18 into the front line as a 6/6 guard, enjoy. Again, just pure value. Calliope, however you prefer to pronounce it. This card is another kind of fundamental card in this deck, and one that I know people go backwards and forwards and not being sure why I include. I include this card because it gives us something we need, which is reach. This gives us a threat from the support line. In addition to which, it does 2 damage randomly when you deploy it, and if you target that damage carefully, like on an outside unit so that there are only 2 targets to divide it between, it can be even better. And if you're targeting it into what is effectively naked cover, so just your opponent's HQ, it can win you the game if your opponent's down to 2 HQ defense, and it does happen. But the key is that this, once you get a buff on it, like for freedom, like a 3/4 artillery is a huge threat. If 164th pops on it, that's also really good. If you can pop this after Samoa, which we'll talk about in a minute, also really good. This thing can become a threat. Yes, it's 2 op cost, but we're not usually struggling for op cost because quite often we don't mind foregoing moving a couple of things in the front line that are just there to trade bodies to get a really big targeted hit that can go wherever we want to remove, for example, a bomber or an air threat or a guard or a specific problem, or just target HQ. Again, it's a good tactical tool, but I don't think it's worth running a full set, so we run 2. The Samoa S35, this French tank is nuts, it's crazy, it's just a really good body, and then its effect is insane. I have seen people get this wrong though. It is important to understand that when you play this, it does not trigger until the next turn, because it only hits the first unit you deploy, and on the turn you deploy the Samoa, it is the first unit you deploy. It can't trigger because you've already deployed a unit. The next unit you put down is not the first unit you deployed this turn, it's the second. So the Samoa won't target it. So your opponent has 1 turn to remove it, and dear lord they'd better, because this thing spirals hard. Do not underestimate how devastating a Calliope that is a 3/4 with 1 op cost as opposed to a 2/3 with 2 op cost actually is. Obviously you can hit other things with it, but that is a big hit for your opponent. Speaking of other things you can hit with it that are a big threat to your opponent, this is the Bloch MB152. This thing is so good for value. It is a good body, it has heavy armor, and it draws you a card. Alright, yes, it's 2 op cost, so ideally you want Samoa to have gone down first because you really want to bring this up to a 4/4 with 1 op cost, but frankly, it's fine as it is, and it has heavy armor, and the card draw is critical because we need card draw. Traditionally, US frontline has struggled. The classic US-Germany frontline struggled because it needed to find card draw, either through triggered card draw from the German infantry that draws if you hold the front line, or by deploying the Shermans, which only worked if you had a US unit in the front line. This is, as long as it's the first unit you drop it, an unconditional card, which is good. Speaking of draw, the Hazards. So this card is controversial. I know people who feel that you can cut it. I disagree. It is a good 3-cost body It's a great 4-drop because you can push it forward and it's a good body, but it's also an insanely good 3-drop when your opponent has a naked board. Because once you start trading and keep the trading, this is a draw engine. And that's huge. And you would be surprised how often this will trigger. And honestly, if this only triggers once or twice in an entire battle, hell, some of the time, even if this doesn't trigger at all, it's still good value because it's a 3-4 body. It trades well. And that's all we need. Put Bocage Warfare on it, and again, like many of the things in this, or for Freedom, if you can get a buff on it, it's even bigger, and that's something we like to do. But yeah, this card is an incredibly strong engine. Do not underestimate the value of this card. The Hellcat, I mean, this is your fire and forget missile and a big finisher in this deck, especially if you've got Samoa on the board, but frankly, even without, just being able to hit the opponent's HQ for 5, for a 5 cost and do 4 damage. 5 cost for 4 damage to the opponent's HQ, which is a lot of the time what this is, or 5 cost for a 4k removal, or 4 defense removal, is not necessarily bad. And it can be an 8 defense removal when your opponent blitz doctrines into huge tanks. Do not underestimate the potency of this thing against, say, armoured trains or big German tanks. That double damage is strong. First Marines, a card that I consider to be chronically underplayed. This is just value. This is exactly like the Hussards. This is the identical text and body. The only difference is instead of giving some card draw, it gives smokescreen to your HQ until your next turn starts, and that's fine. Sometimes it's useful, especially if your opponent has bombers, but the majority of the time we are playing this for its body weight. It's just a good trading body. I consider this to be a very good value 4-drop. And that means we have 5 strong Blitz 4-drops. Because we have 2 Hussards in this. M10A1, one of the most ubiquitous tools in the US arsenal in this game. This is your suppress with a body. It is strictly better than Duress. Do not fall into the trap of thinking that Duress is good value because it's a 0-cost card. Wasting a card slot in the deck is substantially less good, because most of the time you're going to have 3 credits by the time there's something you want to suppress anyway, and if it's earlier than that, you're probably trading to the advantage with your good early units. This thing removes guards, this thing removes annoying effects, this thing then becomes a 2-cost 4-damage threat from your support line. Really, there's not a lot else to say. This card is amazing. Played tactically, it literally wins you games. Speaking of played tactically, cards that win you games, 327th Pathfinders is still one of the most insane tools that I have ever used in this game. Used well, this thing is bonkers. In particular, in this deck, it becomes much harder to remove because you can target it with some buffs, or your opponent can trade out to it. Which is not a bad thing. This is a great target if this is running. This is a fantastic target for Freedom. Just making it harder to remove. The constant bouncing of your opponent. Now, obviously, be cautious of bouncing value. Sometimes you will reach the point whereby you need to push this forward and sacrifice it because your opponent is getting value out of it, like recycling Glamour Boys if you're playing Britain. But the majority of the time, this gives you such a huge tempo and credit advantage that it is so worth playing it hurts. Again, played well, this is a critical tool. The venerable M4 Sherman, which for the first time in my memory I'm only running 3 of rather than a full set in a US deck because I just don't have the slots. It's a good body, it draws a couple of cards if you have a US unit in the front line. It's decent, but honestly in this deck to a certain extent it's filler. We have other draw. I have considered cutting 1 or 2 of these, certainly 1 of these for some other stuff, but I still find it has enough value just as a body. Especially when you combine it with Samoa, because then this becomes a 5-5 with 1 op cost. We don't like that it doesn't have Blitz, but such is life. And obviously the draw, if you can proc it, and a lot of the time you can, is really good. Right, Stars and Stripes. This is one of 2 hard removal, like support line removals we run, and we focus on support line removal because our front line removal is trading. But when we pin our opponent to the back line, this just devastates them. Timed right, this wipes your opponent's back line and leaves you open to hard trade. Or hit face insanely. Always run, always good. We can do it. Now, running one of these is a bit of an odd choice, but this is a timing card. The best time for this card, there are 2 really good times for this card. One is when you absolutely have to survive an aggro onslaught. They're starting to get you down, and you need to give your HQ some defense and get a card draw. The much more common time you'll use this is to create an unassailable or near unassailable advantage in board position, because you have a strong frontline presence, your opponent is pinned to the backline, possibly under threat of being hit with one of your 2 backline clears, and this makes every one of your frontline and bodies just even harder to remove and gets you a card. It's very worth using, but it's a tool, again, that you have to use well. We'll get to that in a bit. Finally, Strategic Bombing, probably still one of the best elites in the US. Again, this is just backline removal and credit denial. It's just good value. There are very few bad times to play this. As long as you can pop a couple of units, sometimes it's worth even. If your opponent's really struggling, is short-handed, and is desperately trying to get their way back into a game, it can actually be worth firing this off, even though they have nothing on the board, and all you get is 3 damage to the HQ, and they lose a credit slot. That can be enough to win you the game, seriously. Not often the case, but it can be. That's the deck. Let's have a look at curve. So this deck is heavy mid-range. You can see it's a heavy mid-range curve because it is hugely concentrated at 3 credit. We have some good 1-drops that we can get extra value of. We have the 0-drops, which are in effect 1-drops because we want to combine them with something. And then we focus heavily on 3-drops, some of which are actual 3-drops, a lot of which are in fact turn 4 blitz plays, and then we don't have a heavy end because we're just looking to leverage the advantage that we've already got with buffs. We don't want the game to go super late. We only run 7 orders. We are an order light deck. We want value. Those orders are just ways to get more value or to give us situational advantage. So, play advice. Read the board. A lot of this is about understanding when to best play cards and when to best get advantage. As I've said before, the key is don't get obsessive about trying to get the perfect turn 1 start. You can play around a fairly average turn 1 start and still trade well. You have enough 1-drops that you're probably drawing into one. What you want to see in your opening hand is a reasonable curve of cards, which is to say that you have something to play ideally in the early game. In a perfect world, you want something to play on turn 1, something to play on turn 2, and then something to play on turn 3. By something to play on turn 2, I often mean 1 or 2 extra 1-drops or a 1-drop with a buff, not necessarily a 2-cost card. Again, looking at the curve, which we did earlier, it's important to realise that curve does not tell you the whole story because many of your units come with blitz and an op cost, and understanding that changes the value. So that's something to be aware of. Like, the actual cost of 1st Marines is 4 because you want to blitz it. So it's a turn 4 play, not a turn 3 play, whereas Cali is a turn 3 play, as is our block. So we look at those as good kind of tools. What you want to do is establish a good cadence of play, by which I mean you want to be putting things down with value at the best possible time and trading smart with your opponent. There are going to be turns where it is better for you to just focus on hitting face, if you can, and leave your opponent to spend their credits trading badly. Just because you can remove an opponent's unit and survive doesn't mean it's the optimum choice when playing mid-range. A lot of the time, the optimum choice is to make your opponent have to spend the credits to do it, because that neuters their ability to do more on their turn. Again, this is about tempo control. We want to be in a position whereby it is just awkward for our opponent to play against us. That's how we win most of the time, and it's certainly how we win against top meta and strong high-end decks that have either really fast early games or really big late games. We want to make their job awkward. Strategic use of draw is important. We have limited draw in this, and we have to make sure we take advantage of it, whilst at the same time not worrying too much if we're in a really difficult position about having to fire off a Hussards when it isn't going to give us draw. It might give us draw later, and it's still a good body. It is in effect just 1st Marines, but French, and the rest of it is a bonus. Samoa is one of those things that you want to commit with care. Be aware of the possibility of countermeasures and removals. It is a mistake that will happen. It is something that will happen. Your opponent will spend on it, but sometimes your opponent blowing an expensive removal on your Samoa to then leave you in a position to drop something and push it forward the next turn is good enough. On the whole, this deck plays quite smoothly. It is a thinking deck. The other piece of advice I will give you is do not try and play quickly with this deck. This is not an aggro deck, it is not a fire and forget deck. A lot of the time it is worth taking your turn to think through the best way to trade what you have on the board or use what you have in hand. Hopefully you'll see some of that with the gameplay that's coming at the end of this, but that's where I'll leave the general guide on the deck, and then we'll take a look at some gameplay. Okay, so we're going to jump into some gameplay examples, and I'm going to kind of try and talk you through what's going on, the things I do right, the things I do wrong. So the first thing, as ever, is we look for our opposition. We know we're playing Soviets. At the moment, that means probably control, maybe self-damage. Maybe mid-range. So when we're looking at our hand here, we're thinking about what we want to keep. And you'll see I kind of go backwards and forwards thinking. In the end, I choose to keep the Hussards because I don't want to lose. I have turn 1 dragons, turn 1 I can drop Scout Car if I don't get a buff, but also Scout Car can be good for turn 2. And having the Hussards to drop, as I mentioned in the deck breakdown on turn 3, is not the end, especially if we have a clear board. Getting the 164th is great because that gives us another good turn 1 option. The first thing we'll obviously do is push forward, drop the 164th. Now we can afford to push the 164th forward here because what we're giving our opponent the problem was, if they want to play Bloody Sickle, which we expect they may very well have, they can either target the dragons but fail to remove them, or they can target the 164th and cause us to gain a buff. Neither of which is ideal for our opponent right now. So we're already asking our opponent value question. So opponent's going to play a guard. That's okay. Now we've got 164, so we're in an interesting position here. We've got some good trade options because we can turn the board in our favour, which is what we're doing. So we're guaranteed to get the buff where we want it. Our question here is, how do we want to do this? I choose the Scout Car because it's going to have greater value in the long term, because we can hopefully trade that out against something bigger later and keep the buff going on the dragons, which is giving us a pressure play right now. Mobile defense is coming down. This is awkward, but there are ways for us to deal with this. The M10 is kind of just sat there. The question here is, can we make it awkward? We take this, which immediately buffs, meaning, so the key here is now we're in a position whereby it's, you know, we've kind of lost tempo here. It's not the best play I've ever made. I could have left both on the board and left my opponent to make the decision, but what I'm actually doing is asking my opponent really bad question. This is a terrible misplay on my part. What I have done is remove the option, but I'm very much over-relying on the fact that we have Hussards in hand and can get draw, and we're about to get punished with the Fiat. I very quickly think about the M10. Obviously dragons first, but the M10 removes the heal on the Fiat in an attempt to get back. So this is going to be a hard game to get back because I misplayed. I should have looked at that earlier turn for much better value. It happens. Our opponent, quite smartly, is just looking to... Now, our opponent doesn't trade out here. They're leaving that up to us, which is fine. So we're going to take advantage of this. Now, the Hussards now becomes a double draw. Because obviously we got the draw from the buff, we've got a 4-5 body in the front line, and now we've got an extra draw. Cali's good to see, but we would love to see something else. Removal, we're going to see a lot of that in this match, and we know we are. So we know at this point that we're playing pretty much a heavy control deck, so this is going to be a long slog, and our win chances aren't great. So I'm taking the early tempo here. I'm just trying to get a body on board and hope that it'll hold. If needs be, next turn we can do it to get draw and keep this thing mostly alive. Because we're going to have 7 credits. We get Hellcat, and now we have to think. But what we're actually going to do is Strat Bomb. Again, this is a very aggressive play on my part, but necessary in my opinion to just stop our opponent from being able to get any momentum. What we want to do is keep our opponent pinned back long enough to try and develop any kind of advantage. We are struggling for draw. The arrival of the big matchy isn't great. So what we need to do now is make sure there are multiple threats on the board so our opponent can't just trade out everything. Marines is good, and I'm thinking about we can do it here. Now, why am I we can do it-ing? This is worth pausing. When you see the stat changes, you hopefully will understand why I'm choosing to we can do it. It's not just the card draw. Our opponent now cannot one-trade the matchy. They can get a double advantage with Claim the Skies, but that will cost them that Claim the Skies use and make the matchy weak to the M18 Hellcat that we have in hand. Which is sort of what we expect to happen here. I'm expecting Claim the Skies and trade, because that's the ideal play for our opponent if they've got it. Instead, they're going to Courson. Now, Courson is quite strong here. We have some thinking to do here. We can push up to get value. We get the draw. The M10 is just amazing. It's just an immediate advantage because we're putting another body on the board. We're now... So this is where we are in a very different position. We have board position in a big way here. Our opponent can't easily come out of the support line. They do not have good trades into the back line. They can't clear out the artillery because they don't have enough without Claim the Skies. Whatever they do, they have to leave a threat on board unless they have a clear. Now, of course, this is so we might see that, but we are establishing a strong board. Our opponent's thinking, which is smart, figuring out their turn, which is a good sign. I like that. So they're going to trade with the Courson, which I'm not quite sure I understand this play, but then the Naval Brigade comes down and I start to kind of get it. But there are some issues here. So we are not going to... So this is what I talked about earlier on when I was talking about sometimes you leave your opponent make the hard decisions. We are just running face. We could Hellcat. We're going to Hellcat because it puts more pressure. So what we're saying to our opponent is you're just going to have to start trading out your stuff. You're going to have to lose some of your stuff to try and clear the threat. Our opponent doesn't know we have Hellcat in hand, doesn't know we have Cali in hand, but right now they've got no choice but to hard trade. Now they can rely on ambush. Lion for a Day, of course, clears, and then they go for the big swing. Now, at this point, we have some thinking to do. But the easiest thing for us to do is create a strong board position, which we do, because now we have 2 pieces of artillery, and we can hold the front line again. So this is going back to what I was talking about in the deck, is the 164th is not just an early game tool, this is now just a terrible trade for our opponent because they're just going to buff our artillery. And if they buff our artillery, they give us lethal unless they can clear the artillery, so our opponent's now digging. Which is good, we want our opponent to be digging. Engineers comes down, now they need something to sacrifice to take advantage. The Yak is not it, and they're dead. So this is just a win. It's a pretty good win. It's a win past an early horrendous misplay on my part, which is important to acknowledge. But it's a good result, and it shows that you can play through hard control decks. You just need to think your turns through. Early on, I should have played a lot better, so this should probably have been smoother, and I think that's also... I very deliberately make sure that you see my misplays. I don't just record the games that go super well. Into another game. I'm going to, as usual, be looking to see who our opponent is. So we have Germany. So things that are going through our head at the minute. Germany-France, which is a good mid-range deck at the minute. Germany-Finland countermeasures. Germany-Finland discard. Germany-Finland Lotta Heinz, which is a tank-based deck. All possibilities. Germany control of some variety. UK control is an outside chance, but unlikely. This is an imperfect starting hand, but I don't want to lose too much of it. I pitch so that I still have turn 1, turn 2, and turn 3 if I need it, and we get very lucky. So this is kind of the god hand, because we have the huge early play, depending on how this goes. Because we are on the play, we're not in danger of the countermeasure being a problem. But we're just going to use dragons, Bocage Warfare, and push, and this is an incredible advantage. 3-4 on turn 1 in the front line is huge, and our opponent is going to struggle to deal with it. Right, so now we think about turn 2. Those Cuirassiers looking really good, because we get a free unit off them, and we can still do 3 damage to face. We feel our opponent's going to start spamming countermeasures. We might use the 164th. There we go. So we know we're on probably a countermeasures deck. So we need to think about how we want to do this. Bocage Warfare looks really good. Now, this is technically something you need to be careful of. We are not in danger at the minute of the countermeasure, so we're taking advantage. There's only the 0-cost countermeasure, which would have cancelled a deployment effect or buff. And now we've got a huge front line. 8 damage sat in the front line, and very little our opponent can do. So, Germany-France. So we now know what we're playing. This isn't hugely difficult. You can see that I popped this because the odds were good that I was going to get the clean trade, which I do. And then I can drop the first Marines. Now, I could have dropped the 18, but I want the Marines, and I want the Marines because I have an M4 Sherman in hand. If I drop the 18, I do get a 0-op cost bigger body, but I don't have access to draw next turn, whereas with the Marines, I can still do 3 damage to face, push the Marines up, and get 2 cards worth of draw off of a Sherman if I feel I need to. One of those things where it's worth thinking about when you're playing the game and just being aware of that option. Not always just about the big body, and we've already got a solid body front line. Our opponent is going to bounce, but then just surrenders, which is very understandable. Game was kind of getting out of control. I'm not sure that they needed to surrender quite that quickly, but they were in a bad position. Again, this was a game in which we just got early board advantage and tempo, and our opponent just didn't feel they could get it back. Right, another game, another opponent. Looks like US, although there is a card back bug at the moment. So now we're wondering, we're going to get Mirror, US-France. Unlikely, not that many people are playing it. Throp's possible, but by far the most likely is Ramp. This is not a good opening hand, considering we're on the draw, by which I mean we're playing second. We're going to need to clear out this hand, so we do. Clear out hard. We keep the Marines, because then at least if we do get to turn 4, we have a push. Bocage we're keeping, because the odds were we'd see a 1-drop, and we did. Jasko comes down. That's fine. We do not push up the 164th. We want it in a position whereby we don't push. We want to be able to target it with Bocage. Opponent's going straight for production order. We check. It's the D. So You see your opponent going hard for a D, you are probably in a better position with this deck than if they go for the J. Just something to be aware of. Your win odds are much better. So this is a pretty clean frontline turn. We've got a 3-3 and a 1-1, and whatever your opponent does, buffs going somewhere. The best they can do is clear them both down and trade out, which they don't want to do. So, turn 3, we get dragons, which is fantastic. We have marines, which gives us pressure at the back. And we just put our opponent in another position where they've got difficult questions to answer. There's a kind of question that a ramp deck or Throp is going to struggle to answer this quickly. They go hard for the B. Now, this is a weird play from our opponent. Whilst it is true that we can't kill the bomber unless we have an M10, not that they know we don't, and by the way, we top deck one. So even without the M10, our opponent's taking a huge risk for only 6 damage. With the M10, this is just game over. Our opponent has just given up one of their most powerful tools. We now have exactly enough damage in the front line to clear it out, and we can still get an extra body in. So this is the definition of a strong tempo turn. So our board position has now become a clear tempo advantage. While we are behind on cards, our opponent has no proactive units on board, and not nearly enough credits to operate with to find a way back. 5 credits is not easy to find a way back against a 5 board. They ramp, very understandable. We're going to Sherman to draw. We could have Samoa'd, but we don't have much that we want to play. We're just going to take advantage of the position. I don't ping the 2 1s because they're doing 0 damage before anyone wonders why, because Jasko is still there and we haven't dealt with it yet, which we'd like to find an M10 for, but realistically we've probably still got the win. Strat bombing here is kind of a misplay by my opponent, or a desperation play, because it only clears 1 threat. I sort of, at this point, did expect my opponent to surrender after that strat bomb, because it feels like a just fling because I'm annoyed strat bomb, because it doesn't achieve anything good. Popping 1 unit and denying me 1 credit when I have 0 op cost bodies. Now here is the we can do it turn that I was talking about in the video about this deck. This is me just turning the screws. I could just push damage, but by doing this, what I'm saying to my opponent is I'm going to get more access. It gives me a better chance of seeing the M10 that removes that Jasko as a problem, and puts all of my units into incredibly difficult terrain. There is the M10. I get very lucky here, and we still get 2 damage. Can't attack with the Marines, such is life, but our opponent now has an insane amount of defense to remove from the front line. Our opponent doesn't know that the game is effectively over on board, because they don't know we have an M10. But we do. So we know where we're at, and we know we're going to come up just slightly short. So we have 6 credits. We play 3 to drop the N10, which gets rid of the Jasko. We can then move forward, but cannot attack with the Sherman. But we can do 8 damage from the front line and put ourselves in a position for lethal. Opponent's going to play blue and grey in the hope to get value. That's fine. Now we just pop dragons because we can. M10 out this. And we're just saying to our opponent, if you want to go fishing, and you're going to have to go fishing for retributions, we are not giving you an easy way to do it. You're going to have to find a way to sacrifice your own unit if you want to do that, and there's no easy way for our opponent to do that. They can't, for example, just push the Jasko forward because there's nothing that deals 4 damage, and this is something to be very aware of. If I had pushed up one of the tanks, specifically the Sherman, to try and give a bigger threat, I would have allowed them a play out off of using blue and grey, because they'd be able to sacrifice the Jasko, get a outrage, which would then go retribution fishing, and we don't want to play that game. Bomber Mafia is a big play here, but it's kind of not great because we can do it, removed its teeth. Depth charges is our opponent's only option. We know it's coming, so now we just establish ourselves. So our opponent's trying to set up now to be able to go fishing, and we know they are. But at this point, we're not too worried. The Samoa gives us a huge tempo advantage. Now I'm saying to my opponent, if you want to go fishing, you can go fishing. But I'm just going to sacrifice to make it a little bit more of a threat. Spin down the body. And this allows me to remove 1 unit. So now what I've done is I've effectively said to my opponent, you can only find 1 retribution. You cannot fiddle around to find a way to find 2. I want to minimize the number of retributions our opponent can fish for because they have a lot of credits, which means they can start doing serious fishing with the develop 2 retributions to try and get anything for HQ defense. As it is, they're almost certainly going to sacrifice from the front line, into the front line rather, and we're certainly going to sacrifice the blue and grey and go fishing because that's their only chance of survival unless they're holding something in hand we don't know about. Thinking time for our opponent, which is very understandable. Honor and loyalty, so it's actually mill. Way too late for mill to be effective. Now they fish. Now if they were going to fish, they should have fished first, not honor and loyalty. Need to give yourself the best chance. Outrage fishing begins. We have strat bombing, which is hugely important. Holding it up to remind me to talk about it, because strat bombing is the ultimate threat here. So we have an imperfect life. What we can do, though, is this, and then push up, have a cup of tea, generally wait, because now we know lethal is in hand. We can push up the Cuirassier. Just, once again, we're back in another position where our opponent has a near impossible front line to answer. They've had no ability to get any kind of pressure on us in the entire game. Compromise, so now they're just desperately digging for HQ defense. I'm half expecting another compromise, trying to force overdraw, because they really don't have another one, and here it comes. Now they're hard drawing themselves here, which is not brilliant. They're going to defend in depth, which is fine, but they've put us even where they stand right now, Millie's going to struggle to find a way back from this. Now we think for a minute here about how do we want to go about doing. We want to put pressure on. That block is amazing because it lets us draw into another piece of artillery. And now we are just twisting the screws, threatening lethal constantly, and waiting to see if our opponent can find a way out. I really don't see how Mill finds a way out of this. Bomber Mafia is not good enough right now. 12 credits is a lot, but you have nothing on board. You've not played Yank, so you can't go retribution fishing. But we're going to wait and see, and our opponent is thinking because they do know what they're doing. But this is just under pressure. So Night Bombing, I don't like this card. I don't quite understand including it, but it's there and they play it. You can randomize all you like. You've still got, I mean, you've now avoided technically lethal because we've only got 5 damage in the front line, but we've still got artillery, so lethal's there, so you have to find HQ defense, which we know you're going to. Mill. Time to apply yet more pressure, so we are just going to look to make sure that we give our opponent no reasonable outs. We want to clear our hand down a bit so we're not easy to force overdraw on, although honestly I am not being milled to a loss here. Our opponent is desperately struggling to find the answer, and I don't think they have it. Once again, the majority of our bodies on the board are 3 health or above, which means our opponent can't rely on Bomber Mafia, which is hugely important in this meta. And we're preparing to go retribution fishing again, but it is now, unfortunately for our opponent, going to be just a little bit too late. We could Stars and Stripes, but that seems a bit showboaty. Instead, we can bring them down, pop here, and we still have lethal via strat bombing. This is a good example of playing slowly, carefully, taking your turns and not trying to overpress. thinking about what your opponent's likely to do, and particularly once we knew it was mill, we knew we had to put ourselves in a position whereby we could most likely win. But there you have it. That's some gameplay. I hope you enjoyed the deck. As ever, be good human beings, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.